Ready for a deep dive into something a little different? Today we are trading research papers and news articles for crayons and sketch pads.
That's right. We are going to be exploring the world of therapeutic art and how it can help children cope with trauma.
Specifically, we'll be looking at a method called SITCAT.
Sensory interventions for trauma in children, adolescents, and parents.
Oh, wow. You've got that.
I had to practice it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to be taking a look at SITCAT, and our source material is a book that really details this approach.
You know, it's fascinating stuff when you think about it. We're really going to be getting a glimpse into how drawings can be a powerful language for children, especially, when words fail them.
Yeah, it makes you realize how limiting traditional talk therapy can be, especially for kids who might not have the vocabulary or even feel safe enough to really articulate their experiences.
Right. And then drawing allows them to communicate on an entirely different level, to really externalize those complex emotions and anxieties that they might not even, fully understand themselves.
And what's interesting is that the book emphasizes that it's not about the artistic merit of the drawing. It's really the meaning that the child assigns to it that matters.
Exactly. The story of LeBron, this 8-year-old boy who was struggling after his father's sudden death, really kind of brings this point home.
Yeah.
His drawing, which was just a simple baseball field, helped uncover this heavy emotional burden that he was carrying.
Yeah. LeBron's case is a powerful example of how children internalize blame, even for events that are entirely beyond their control.
Right.
He had hit a baseball moments before his father collapsed from a heart attack, and he'd become convinced that he was somehow responsible.
Oh, wow. It's heartbreaking. And imagine trying to express that kind of guilt and confusion as a child. Drawing really provided him with that outlet, a way to communicate those really tangled emotions that he just couldn't put into words.
LeBron's case also highlights a core principle of SITCAP, that the therapist's role is not to interpret, but to understand. So instead of analyzing the drawings, they act as curious witnesses, gently guiding the child's exploration of their own experiences.
So instead of asking why, which can feel very accusatory to a child, the focus is on asking what.
Exactly.
What do you see in this drawing? What does it mean to you?
Exactly. Those open-ended what questions create that sense of safety and encourage the child to share their perspective without judgment. It's a subtle but powerful shift in the therapeutic dynamic.
It ties into that concept of attunement, right? Where you're really present with the child, meeting them on their emotional level and mirroring their energy.
You're right. Attunement is not just about listening. It's about creating a space where the child feels seen and understood. The book describes this training exercise where practitioners analyze a series of drawings. But there's a twist.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the twist?
They're specifically instructed to resist interpreting the drawings. Instead, they are guided to just focus on details, prompting them to ask questions that lead to a deeper understanding of the child's experience.
Oh, so it's about retraining those analytical instincts and tapping into that childlike sense of curiosity instead.
You could say that. The goal is to become a curious observer, not an expert decipherer. And this shift really helps build trust and allows the child to lead the way.
Now, the book also delves into how SITAT helps kids address those raw subjective experiences of trauma: terror, worry, hurt, and anger. And those are really heavy emotions, especially for a child.
Absolutely. And SITAT offers specific drawing exercises and questions that are tailored to each of these experiences. It gives children a structured, tangible way to confront and process those difficult feelings.
There are so many intriguing questions in the book, but the ones focused on hurt and the worst part really stood out to me. They just seem to get to the heart of the matter.
For example, when exploring hurt, the therapist might ask, where do you feel the hurt the most in your body? Or if your hurt had a name, what would it be? These prompts encourage the child to really give form to something that's so abstract and overwhelming.
Right, so instead of those feelings swirling around inside, the child is really encouraged to externalize them, put them on paper, which makes it all feel a little less scary and a bit more manageable.
Precisely. And then there's that powerful question, what was the worst part? And while it seems so simple, it often unlocks a flood of emotions for children who might not be ready or able to articulate them verbally.
That leads us to the powerful story of 3 siblings, Emma, Peter, and Andrea, who were 6, 11, and 15 years old, respectively, when they experienced the unthinkable: the murder of their 15-year-old sister.
Tragic doesn't even begin to describe it. To lose a sibling so young and in such a brutal way, it's unimaginable.
Each child coped with that trauma so differently. Emma, the youngest, became defiant and constantly fought with her younger sister. Peter, the middle child and only boy, became hypervigilant and increasingly aggressive.
Yeah, those are classic trauma responses, unfortunately. Children often lack the ability to understand and express their feelings, and so those emotions manifest as behavioral problems. It's their way of trying to regain a sense of control in a world that suddenly feels very unsafe.
Right, and then there's Andrea, the oldest, who completely shut down emotionally, becoming detached and avoiding anything that reminded her of her sister.
Yeah, and that avoidance, while a common coping mechanism, can really become a barrier to processing grief and connecting with others.
All three children went through brief traditional counseling, but those deep-seated wounds remained. And that's where SITCAP came in.
Are you ready to explore how this method helped each of these siblings confront their trauma and begin to heal? I know I am.
Absolutely. Let's start with Emma. What did her drawings reveal about her inner world?
Well, one of the first things that Emma drew was her face, but not the rest of her body.
So she was literally missing a part of herself in the drawing.
That's one way to look at it. When asked where the rest of her was, she simply said, nowhere. It was a very literal response, typical of young children.
I wonder if that nowhere was really symbolic of that emotional void she was feeling after her sister's death.
It's a possibility. And, she was then asked to draw the rest of her body, which she did. Later, she was asked to draw how she imagined her sister Elizabeth looked dead. And once again, she only drew her sister's face.
So she was really focusing on what was missing, those faces that were no longer a part of her daily life.
Exactly. It suggests a deep connection, almost a merging of identities with her sister. It seems she was having difficulty separating herself from Elizabeth, grasping the permanence of death.
That makes sense, especially given how close they were. It's like she was trying to hold on to that connection, even in death.
And that's where the family in action drawing becomes so revealing. Emma was asked to draw a picture of her family doing something, and she drew her mother, brother, and older sister.
But she left herself out.
Exactly. When asked where she was, Emma pointed to her mother's stomach in the drawing and said, I'm here, inside my mommy's tummy.
Wow. What a poignant image. It's like she was longing for that sense of security, that undivided attention she had with her mother before the tragedy.
It's a perfect example of how SITCAT can really help us see the world through a child's eyes. Emma's mother had been so overwhelmed with her own grief and managing her other children's behavior that she hadn't fully grasped Emma's need for that extra love and reassurance.
It makes you realize that sometimes those most profound acts of healing are really the simplest. Just being present, offering comfort, and letting the child know that they're loved and safe.
You're right. Now, the therapist eventually encouraged Emma to draw herself outside of her mother's tummy. She asked if she should draw herself as a baby, and then proceeded to do just that.
It's like she was subconsciously emphasizing that need to be nurtured and protected. It's a very natural response after experiencing such a traumatic loss to regress to a time of safety and dependence.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how those subconscious desires emerge through these seemingly simple drawings. And here's the thing. Once Emma's mother understood and responded to that need for more attention, her defiant behavior, those fights with her sister, practically vanished.
It's amazing how powerful those shifts in understanding can be. Now, let's move on to Peter. His journey with SITCAT is a powerful example of how drawing can help children express feelings that are really difficult to articulate verbally.
Yes. Peter initially seemed very open to talking about the murder, readily sharing details about his last moments with his sister. But as he began describing the more gruesome aspects, the words got stuck. He started stuttering, struggling to find the words for the unimaginable.
It sounds like his body, his subconscious, was really trying to protect him from the full force of those horrific images.
Exactly. And then the tears came. It was a release of that pent-up pain and fear he had been carrying for over a year.
It's a reminder that grief doesn't follow a linear path. It can really resurface even months or years after the event, catching us off guard.
Absolutely. So after that emotional outpouring, Peter was ready to draw. His first drawing, a very simple one, helped him tell us more about what he remembered before his sister left for the park. It seemed like drawing offered him a safer way to engage with those memories, to control the flow of information.
It was his way of dipping his toes back into those painful water.
You could say that. And then he started drawing a series of self-portraits, which revealed a fascinating shift in his self-perception. He drew this small, incomplete figure in the corner of the page and said it was a picture of himself before the murder.
So he was already establishing a clear distinction between who he was before the trauma and who he was now.
Yes, and when asked to draw himself now, he started sketching the lower half of his body, but then abruptly stopped. He said he didn't like the way he was drawing it and seemed to be struggling to reconcile those two versions of himself.
The trauma had fundamentally changed him, and perhaps he wasn't ready to accept that new reality. It's understandable.
Absolutely. He was offered fresh paper to start over, but he insisted on using the same sheet. And then he drew a full self-portrait in the center of the page, and this one was very different.
Trainees who studied this case often comment on how powerful his arms look in this new drawing and how his facial expression has changed. But of course, we can't interpret those details. What did Peter have to say about this new self-portrait?
He said, "I just drew it that way because I should be smiling." But it was very clear from his tone and his body language that the smile was forced, a mask hiding his true feelings.
It was a brave face, a way of trying to project strength and resilience, even as he was grappling with fear and sadness. He was trying to hold it all together, be strong for his family.
Exactly. It was around this time that he shared something truly revealing. When asked what scared him the most, now he said he was terrified that his sister's killer would break out of jail and come after the rest of his family.
That explains the hypervigilance, the aggression. He's living in a constant state of fear, feeling responsible for protecting his loved ones, especially as the only male in the family.
It makes his focus on physical strength in the drawings all the more understandable. He's trying to create a sense of safety and control in a world that feels utterly unpredictable and dangerous.
And that's where the brilliance of SITCAP comes in. It helped the therapist understand that Peter's aggression wasn't simply a behavioral problem, it was a survival mechanism. It was his way of trying to assert control in a situation that felt utterly out of his control.
It's a perfect illustration of why it's so crucial to understand the why behind the behavior, not just address the symptoms.
Absolutely. Now, Peter also had a very powerful experience when asked about his hurt. Initially, he said it was in his head, mentioning that he used to have severe headaches after the murder.
Trauma often manifests in physical symptoms. Headaches, stomach aches, sleep disturbances. The body keeps score even when the mind is trying to cope.
Right. But when the therapist asked him where he felt the hurt when he thought about his sister now, he said it was mostly in his stomach. The pain had moved deeper, become more visceral.
And he struggled to describe that feeling, so the therapist encouraged him to draw it. What he created, completely unprompted, was a powerful, even haunting image of his hurt.
It depicted these mangled internal organs, almost like his insides were being ripped apart, a very powerful visual representation of that deep emotional pain he was carrying.
And the act of drawing it seemed to be a turning point for him. By giving form to his hurt, he was able to confront it, to start processing it.
It's like that age-old advice, name it to tame it.
Yeah.
By externalizing his pain through art, he was really taking a step towards healing.
That's a great way to put it. From that point on, the tension in the session eased. He started talking more freely, even laughing a bit. It was as if a weight had been lifted. He had finally found a way to express what words couldn't capture.
His healing continued even after the sessions ended. His mother reported that he was becoming more like himself, that playful, outgoing boy he had been before the tragedy.
So Peter's story really emphasizes the power of expression, of finding a healthy outlet for those trapped emotions. It also highlights the importance of understanding the function of seemingly negative behaviors.
Sometimes aggression isn't about anger, but about fear and a desperate need for control.
It's a crucial lesson for anyone working with traumatized children. Now, are you ready for Andrea's story? Hers is a journey of avoidance and the struggle to reconnect with life after loss.
Let's hear it. I'm particularly interested in how SITCAP helped her break through that emotional shutdown.
Well, Andrea initially presented as very composed, even cheerful. She readily agreed to draw, answered questions about the murder, but there was a detachment, a lack of emotional depth in her responses.
It sounds like she was putting on a brave face, trying to shield herself and others from the pain.
Exactly. It was a very effective defense mechanism that kept people at a distance. But that avoidance, it comes at a cost.
It prevents connection and ultimately hinders the grieving process.
And sadly, that's exactly what happened with Andrea. She pushed away her friends and retreated into herself. Her mother, already overwhelmed with her own grief and managing her other children, misinterpreted Andrea's behavior as indifference.
It's a very common misunderstanding. We often equate emotional expression with the depth of feeling, but sometimes the absence of emotion is the most profound expression of pain.
You're absolutely right. It's like that saying, still waters run deep.
Now, the turning point for Andrea came when she was asked to draw a picture of her sister dead. How did she react to that very direct confrontation with the loss?
At first, she resisted. She said she didn't know how to draw it, that she could describe Elizabeth better. It seemed she was trying to maintain that distance to avoid engaging with the rawness of her grief.
But the therapist gently persisted, reminding her that it wasn't about artistic skill, but about expressing her feelings.
That gentle encouragement seemed to be what she needed. She eventually agreed to draw, and what she created was both heartbreaking and incredibly revealing.
I can only imagine. Tell me more about this drawing.
Instead of a realistic depiction of her sister's body, she drew a simple rectangle. It was blank, empty, a void.
That image is so powerful in its simplicity. It speaks volumes about the void left by loss, that emptiness that can feel impossible to fill.
Exactly. And as she stared at that empty rectangle, tears welled up in her eyes for the first time. That blank space seemed to give her permission to finally feel, to acknowledge the immensity of her loss.
And the therapist simply sat with her, offering silent support as she wept. No words were needed in that moment.
That's the essence of attunement. Being present with the child's emotions, meeting them where they are, without judgment or the need to fix anything.
It's about holding space for their pain, allowing them to process it in their own time and in their own way.
Yes, and from that point on, there was a shift in Andrea. She began to open up, to share her memories of Elizabeth, her pain, her fears. It's amazing how a simple drawing, an act of symbolic expression, can unlock those deep wells of emotion.
It's like that empty rectangle became a bridge between her inner world and the therapist, allowing her to finally connect with her grief and begin the healing process.
So each of these siblings, Emma, Peter, and Andrea, had their own unique journey through grief and trauma. But SICAT provided a common language, a way for them to express what words could not.
And it gave their mother invaluable insights into their struggles, allowing her to better understand and support them.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through talking, but through creating.
Absolutely. It speaks to the innate human need for expression, for finding outlets that allow us to process our experiences and make sense of the world around us.
Now, before we move on from these stories, I wanted to touch on something specific Andrea mentioned. She talked about needing to fix her hair while looking at her self-portrait.
I remember that I was wondering if it was just a random comment or if it held a deeper meaning.
Well, that's the thing about SICAT. It encourages us to pay attention to those seemingly insignificant details because they can offer valuable insights into the child's inner world.
It's like a hidden language, a way of communicating needs and anxieties that might not be obvious at first glance.
Exactly. In Andrea's case, that comment about her hair could reflect a desire to control something, anything in a world that suddenly feels chaotic and unpredictable.
It's a natural response to trauma. When everything feels out of control, we grasp for those little things we can manage, even if it's just fixing our hair.
Precisely. Or it could be a way of deflecting attention away from her emotional state to maintain that facade of composure she presented at the beginning of the session.
It's like a subconscious defense mechanism. Look at my hair, don't look at my pain.
Exactly. So even those seemingly superficial comments can provide valuable clues about the child's inner world.
It makes you realize how much we communicate through those nonverbal cues, those subtle shifts in behavior and language.
And that's why the therapist's role is so crucial. It's about being attuned to those subtle cues, exploring them with curiosity, and gently guiding the child toward deeper self-awareness.
Now, we've been focusing on the individual stories of Emma, Peter, and Andrea, but I'm curious about how their experiences as siblings, as a family unit, played into their healing. Did they ever draw together? Did they share their drawings with each other?
That's a great question, and it's something the book touches on. While SICAT sessions are typically conducted individually, there's also a component that's focused on family integration.
So it's not just about helping the child process their trauma in isolation, it's about rebuilding those family connections that might have been fractured by the event.
Exactly. The book emphasizes the importance of creating a shared narrative, a space where family members can safely express their feelings and support each other.
It makes sense. Trauma can isolate individuals, but it also impacts the entire family system. Each member is coping in their own way, and those differences can sometimes create tension and misunderstanding.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to address those ripple effects, to help families rebuild trust, communication, and a sense of shared understanding.
So did Emma, Peter, and Andrea have a chance to share their drawings and stories with each other?
While the book doesn't explicitly say that, it does highlight how parents are encouraged to participate in sessions and to witness their children's process.
That must be incredibly powerful, both for the child and for the parent.
It can be transformative. For the child, it's an opportunity to feel seen, heard, and validated. And for the parent, it's a chance to step into their child's world, to understand their struggles on a deeper level.
It's like building a bridge of empathy, reestablishing that connection that might have been strained by the trauma. It creates that sense of we're in this together, which is so crucial for healing.
Now let's talk about another key element of SITCAT, cognitive reframing. It's a powerful tool for helping children shift their perspective on the traumatic event, to move from a place of fear and helplessness to a sense of strength and resilience.
So it's not about denying or minimizing the trauma. It's about helping the child reinterpret it in a way that empowers them.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the pain and the challenges, but also recognizing the child's courage, their strength, and their ability to cope.
Can you give us an example of how cognitive reframing might be used in a SITAT session?
Certainly. Imagine a child draws a picture of themselves hiding during a traumatic event. The therapist might ask questions like, what helps you stay safe? What did you do to protect yourself? What inner strength did you draw upon?
It's about highlighting those moments of agency, those acts of resilience, even in the midst of a terrifying experience.
Precisely. And by focusing on those positive aspects, the child can begin to see themselves as a survivor, not just a victim. It's a crucial shift in self-perception.
That's a powerful message to send, especially to a child who's been through such a traumatic experience. It helps them reclaim their sense of agency and power.
Now, the book outlines 4 specific criteria for developing effective cognitive reframing statements. The first is that the statement must be believable to the child.
It needs to resonate with their experience, to feel authentic and true, not like some empty platitude.
Exactly. The second criterion is that the statement must be strength-based. It should highlight the child's inherent strengths, their abilities, and their capacity for resilience.
So it's about shifting the focus away from their weaknesses or perceived failures and recognizing the resources they already possess.
Yes. The third criterion is that the reframing statement must be hope-filled. It's about helping the child see beyond the immediate pain and envision a brighter future, one where they can thrive and heal.
That's so important, especially for children who might feel trapped in their trauma, unable to see a way forward.
And finally, the fourth criterion is perhaps the most challenging, but also the most transformative. The reframing statement must help the child to see the traumatic experience as a resource for growth and transformation.
Are you saying that something terrible, something that caused so much pain, can actually be a source of strength?
That's exactly what cognitive reframing is about. It's about recognizing that even the most difficult experiences can teach us valuable lessons, shape our character, and ultimately make us stronger.
It's a radical idea, but also incredibly empowering.
It is. And it's not about denying the pain or minimizing the impact of the trauma. It's about helping the child see the potential for growth and transformation within that experience.
It's like finding the seeds of resilience amidst the ashes.
Beautifully put. And that's what SITCAT, with its emphasis on drawing, curiosity, and cognitive reframing, aims to do, to help children find those seeds, to nurture them, and to ultimately blossom into their full potential.
Now, I know we're running out of time for this part, but the book mentions a case study that perfectly illustrates this fourth reframing criterion. It involves a young man named Sam. Can we quickly discuss his story before moving on?
Sure. Sam's story is a powerful testament to the potential for healing and growth, even after enduring multiple traumas. He experienced physical abuse, witnessed domestic violence, and even lost his father at a young age.
It's hard to imagine the impact that those kinds of experiences would have on a developing child.
Sadly, these early traumas can have this ripple effect, shaping our emotional responses and behaviors for years to come. In Sam's case, he struggled with anger, depression, and addiction.
Right.
It's a heartbreaking but not uncommon trajectory for those who've experienced such adversity.
Yeah. But Sam's story isn't just about the devastating effects of trauma. It's about his journey of resilience, of finding meaning and purpose in the face of immense pain. I'm curious, how did SITCAP play a role in his healing?
When Sam started using drawing to explore his past, his initial images were filled with rage and despair. They were dark, chaotic, almost violent in their intensity. It was as if he was finally giving those suppressed emotions a tangible form. a voice.
It sounds like he was finally able to confront those dark feelings he'd buried for so long.
Exactly. And the therapist, using the principles of SITCAT, created that safe space for Sam to express those raw emotions without judgment or fear.
That safe space is so crucial. Without it, those buried emotions can really fester and manifest in destructive ways.
You're absolutely right. As Sam continued to draw and explore his past through art, something remarkable happened. His drawings began to shift. The darkness lifted, and new colors, new shapes, new symbols started to emerge.
It's like he was discovering a new language, a
Yeah.
way to reframe his experiences and see beyond the pain.
Exactly. With a therapist's guidance, he began to identify those moments of resilience, those acts of courage and strength that had helped him survive his traumatic childhood.
He was no longer just a victim, but a fighter, a survivor. He was reclaiming his narrative.
And that shift in perspective, that newfound sense of agency, was transformative for him. Sam began to see his traumatic experiences not just as sources of pain, but as catalysts for growth. He realized that his struggles had given him a unique understanding of human suffering and a deep empathy for others.
Wow. He found meaning and even purpose in the very experiences that had caused him so much pain. That's incredibly powerful.
It really is. And that realization fueled his desire to help others. He started volunteering at a local shelter, working with children who had experienced similar traumas.
He turned his pain into purpose, using his lived experience to make a difference in the world. That's the true embodiment of that fourth reframing criterion, seeing trauma not as just a wound, but as an opportunity for growth, transformation, and even transcendence.
It's a beautiful and inspiring example of how SITCAP can help children, not only to heal, but to thrive. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, always potential for healing, and always the possibility of finding meaning in our struggles.
Sam's journey is a reminder that healing is a process. It's not about erasing the past, but integrating it into who we become, finding a way to make it meaningful.
Beautifully said. So we've explored the heart of SITCAP, drawing as a language, the therapist as a curious witness, and the power of cognitive reframing. But I'm curious, how does this all translate into an actual therapy session?
Yeah, what does a typical SIT-CAT session look like?
Well, the book outlines a structured process with several key elements. It begins with education. The therapist explains to the child what trauma is, how it affects us physically and emotionally, and how SITCAP can help.
So it starts with empowering the child with knowledge, helping them understand what's happening in their bodies and minds.
Exactly. It's also about normalizing their reactions, letting them know they're not alone in what they're feeling. Then, the therapist introduces the drawing process, emphasizing that it's not about artistic skill, but about expression.
No pressure to be the next Picasso.
Exactly. It's about giving those feelings a visual form, a way to get them out of their heads and onto the page.
What comes next?
The child is invited to draw a picture of the event that caused the trauma. The therapist simply observes, asks open-ended questions, and follows the child's lead.
So no leading questions, no interpretations, just pure curiosity and a willingness to listen.
Precisely. The child's responses, their drawings, and their words guide the rest of the session. The book also stresses the importance of not taking notes during this session.
Why is that?
It's about minimizing distractions and creating that all-important sense of safety for the child. Imagine sharing something deeply personal while someone is constantly scribbling notes. It can feel very clinical and inhibit the free flow of thoughts and emotions.
It makes sense. It keeps the focus on the child and their experience.
Exactly. The therapist relies on their memory and their intuition to guide the process. And that's where attunement comes in. Being fully present with the child, picking up on their nonverbal cues, and responding with empathy and understanding.
It's a delicate dance requiring both sensitivity and skill.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes SITCAT so unique and effective. The book also advises against sending the child home with their drawings right away. Why do you think that is?
Well, it seems like it would be important to maintain the sanctity of the therapeutic space. The drawings are part of the therapy, not something to be shared outside of that context.
That's a great point. It's about preserving the confidentiality of the session, ensuring the child feels safe to express themselves fully. It also protects the child from potential negative reactions from family members or others who might not understand the purpose of the drawings.
It serves as a buffer, ensuring the child's emotional vulnerability isn't exploited or misunderstood.
Exactly. The drawings are ultimately the child's property, but they're handled with care and sensitivity to ensure the child's well-being.
It's been fascinating learning about SICAT and how it helps children navigate the complexities of trauma. It makes you wonder, what if every child who experienced trauma had access to this kind of support?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? A world where children's emotional well-being is prioritized, where their pain is acknowledged and addressed, and where they're given the tools they need to navigate the challenges of life.
What if elements of this approach were integrated into schools, community centers, even homes?
Imagine classrooms where children are encouraged to express themselves through art, where their emotional intelligence is nurtured, and where they're given a language to communicate their feelings. We could be planting seeds of resilience, empathy, and compassion that could blossom into a more compassionate and understanding world.
It's a beautiful vision, and it highlights the importance of training not just therapists, but also teachers, parents, and anyone who works with children in the principles of trauma-informed care.
The more we understand about the impact of trauma, the better equipped we'll be to create environments that support healing and growth.
Well said. On that note of hope and possibility, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of STIOCAT. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. I always appreciate the opportunity to explore these powerful tools for healing and transformation.
And for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about SITCAT and other trauma-informed approaches, we'll include some resources in the show notes. Remember, there's always hope, always help, and always the potential for healing.
And don't forget the power of art. It can be a lifeline, a bridge to understanding, and a catalyst for growth.
Until next time, keep drawing, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of human resilience.